And so we head back once again into the dark woods of the grim. And the woods of the grim lay along the land. And beside it, there is a farm. And it's a big farm with a big barn. And in the barn is Thaddeus. Thaddeus is obsessed with speed. When he couldn't breed a horse fast enough, he built his own. A steam-powered, magnificent horse and then a pair. Made of the most fantastical mechanical capability, powered by steam, they were a sight to be seen. And those two horses drew a carriage, the lightest, most nimblest carriage of all. Every day, early, Thaddeus would open up the barn doors and his horses would step out. And when he was ready, click, off they go, down past the forest, through the byways and highways, round the chapel, up the hill, over the brow, down the steep descent, into the hairpin bend, and back, click, back home. And as soon as he got back home, he'd grab his notebook. He'd be writing. Time he started, time he finished, calculate the speed. And then, how did it go? All the way through the route, making little notes as he went. And then one day, while he was writing his notes, like he did every day, he stopped. There was a girl. There was a girl standing on the corner. On the hairpin. She had a weird hat. It was the weirdest hat he'd ever seen. It was a wide-brimmed hat with a dozen birds flying around, and he thought to himself, flexibility, how does she do that? Oh well, and he carried on with his day. Now that he'd had a conversation with himself about his ride, he knew what changes need to be made for tomorrow. And tomorrow came, and off he went, and round the track, back, writing his notes. That woman was there again today. How does she get a hill and a city on her head and the whole thing not just fall off? Counterbalance? He carried on. And then another day. That woman, how did she get 10 teacups piled on top of each other with the saucers? Some sort of structure. And off he went the very next morning, past the forest, through the highways and byways, round the chapel, up the hill, over the bow, and down he came in the descent. But this time, she was standing there and he stopped. He stopped right beside her and he said, "Hello." And she said, "Oh, that's terribly disappointing." He said, "What do you mean? What have I done? I wanted to talk to you about your hats." And she said, "I'm disappointed because I have been coming, watching you go round this corner and trying to work out whether it's the speed, whether it's the counterbalance or what it is, or whether it's just your riding skill that keeps you on track and not coming skidding off and smashing up. And there was always the possibility that you would, and that would be fun." Thaddeus said, "But I really like your hat. Can I talk to you about your hat?" And they started to talk. They talked about technical things, and he was enthralled by the conversation. She was too. And it wasn't long before that conversation became a marriage and a lifestyle. And the people that lived around the area who just thought Thaddeus was really annoying now found him intriguing. And they were always being invited out, and life was good. It was on one of the mornings when they got up early, the horses were ready, Thaddeus said go, and off they went, through the forest, up through the highways and the byways, round the chapel, up the hill, over the bow, down the steep descent and round the corner, and this time, bam! The heel smashed to pieces on a boulder. The horses broke away, the carriage went up into the air, and as it did, it turned. Thaddeus fell out one way, she fell out the other, and the carriage came down right through her shoulder. Thaddeus came running round. Oh, my darling. He could see the blood spreading across the ground, spreading across their clothes. It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. It will, I promise. Help! Help, somebody, help! 2 riders came round the corner, and it was not long before one was heading for the doctor and the other was helping them get the woman back to her home, for they weren't far from their house. And the doctor came, and he cleaned and he cauterized and he bound that terrible wound. And he said, that's the best we can do. And so the woman looked herself in the mirror, and now she was not balanced. She was not beautiful. And she had no interest in life. While she was repairing physically, Thaddeus spent all of his time, when he wasn't caring for her, selling off half of his farm to buy gold. And with that gold, he began to fashion an arm, taking minute details from the arm that she had lost. And he managed to make it so that the fingers could work, that the arm could move, and it was a masterpiece. And just when she started to feel like she was ready to go back into the world, the doctor came and they fitted the shoulder so that the arm could clip into it. And she dressed. And now she was balanced again. Well, visually, the arm was actually rather heavy. But hey, she was grateful. She could just about make the finger movements to hold a purse. And that was good enough. It could have been so much worse. And so she fashioned beautiful long gloves. And when they went out, with sleeves just over the top of the gloves, and she said, oh, look at my fashion. What do you think? People said, we thought you lost your arm. Oh, no, dear. It's never going to be the same, because she didn't want anyone to know that there was a great deal of wealth draped upon her body. Life was good again. They were able to go out, they were able to have fun, but they never went near the horses or the carriage. They were melted down, too painful to be seen. One day, the young woman, she said to Thaddeus, I feel unwell. I feel a coldness coming over me. I feel a tightening. And with that she fell to the ground. For the poisons from the filth of the earth had been working their way through her body. And she died. Thaddeus was grief-stricken. He made sure that within the coffin she lay in her favourite hat and her favourite gown, and that her gloves were perfectly placed, and both arms there, whole as she should always be, and gone. Good night, my darling. I buried her. And he sat beside her for some time. And it got cold and he went indoors. And he took to his bed. He took to his bed for hours, days, weeks, months. More than a year had passed. The home was going to rack and ruin. Most of the servants had gone. And his main servant, his housemaid, she came up and she said, "Sir, if you don't do something soon, everything, all your heritage will be gone, and I will have to go too." And he lay there that night thinking, it wouldn't be fair to do that to her. Well, she's not using it anymore. She has been there for quite a long time. I've got no choice. I'm going to have to save the farm. And so that very night, Thaddeus took a sack down to the graveside of his wife. And he opened up the grave and he took out the arm. He removed the glove and he placed that arm into his sack. And then he stuffed the arm full of bits of hay and bits of fabric until it looked pretty good actually. And he lay it beside her body and he said, "I'm so sorry." He put everything back the way it should have been, always. And then he made his way back to his room and he threw himself upon the bed and he wept. He felt a sickness inside him. He'd done his best not to look at his wife in any real detail, only focusing on the arm. And he heard a sound. It was a crunch, crunch, crunch. Someone or something was walking across the gravel towards the house. And he heard, "Urgh." Someone or something had just opened the front door. Tip, tip, tip. Someone or something was now walking across the floor of the hall. Step, step, step. Someone or something was now walking upstairs, and someone or something was now walking step, step, step outside his doors. And the door handle moved. And the door swung open, and there, in the moonlight, stood his wife. And he looked at her and, "Oh, my love, what has happened to your beautiful, soft hair?" "Gone. Oh, gone." "Oh, my darling, what has happened to your beautiful, rosy lips?" "Gone. Oh, gone." "And my love, what has happened to your bright, shining eyes?" "Gone. Oh, gone." "And what's happened to your arm?" "You've got it!" And with that she threw herself at him. He rolled off the bed, he ran past her, he ran down the stairs and out the house. And he ran as fast as he could, and he ran and he ran and he ran and he ran. He ran so fast, so blindly did he run, that he didn't realise quite where he was heading until he stopped. Oh, bugger. He was far, far, far into the dark, wild, enchanted woods. He began to quickly look around. Oh, what if there's bears? What if there's wolves? What if it's my wife? Oh my God. He started to search, and then, oh, yeah, there, just there, was a rectangular light, the colour of a candle, a dwelling. Oh, great! And he made his way as best as he could all the way to that light. And then, fortunately, there was a door and a dwelling. And he knocked upon the door. Any bears? No. Come on, come on. Oh, come on, let me in, somebody let me in. And the door opened slowly. And there was a man with a long, pointy beard. Go away, I don't want the likes of you, no travellers coming in here. Go away, said the little man. Thaddeus grabbed hold of his coat and he said, please, don't make me go. If I got eaten by bears or wolves, it's your fault. So let me come in, please let me come in. And the old man said, yeah, come on then. Okay, come in, go sit down by the fire. There wasn't much of a fire, I'm sorry to say. There was just a log, red, parts of it settling down. But the room was warm. And the old man, he handed him a blanket and a rug and a lovely warm drink of chamomile tea. Oh, the smell of it. Oh, the warmth of it spread through his body, and the world didn't seem quite so awful after all. He wrapped himself up and he slept. But he woke with a shock, for there was a bellowing and a roaring, and it was shaking the small little dwelling he was in. Thaddeus leapt out of the bed, ran to the door, desperate to know what it was. He opened the door and it was a beautiful spring morning. The sun was out. The sky was bright. And there was diamonds of dew still on the grass and on the trees. Now this is better, he thought. Right until the moment, looking across the clearing, he saw a stag. This was the biggest stag he'd ever seen, and the antlers were massive. It was like a whole tree stuck on his head. Thaddeus was amazed. And you could see that the deer was staring at something. He followed its gaze. On the other side, there was a bull. The biggest, blackest, meanest, most powerful bull he'd ever seen. And they were both staring at each other. Down came the antlers. Down came the horns. Both animals pawed the ground and then thundered across the clearing. Thundered and crash! And all of the antlers and the horns twisting and turning, crackling and clicking together as each tried to get the better of the other. Scratches into the hides of each creature. The bull was pushing with all of its might, trying to force the stag into a tree. The stag, realising, leapt up with a great bound, came back and twisted, and up and under the bull came the antlers. Bull fell to the ground. Thaddeus was frozen by the sheer power of what he'd just seen. He didn't notice the fact that the stag was now staring directly at him. And the stag ran at him, dipped its head, threw Thaddeus up into the air. He spun and landed astride the deer. And as soon as his bottom hit the back of that creature, it was off. Vroom! Off it went. So there's an opportunity for you to all join in. Off he went. through the forest, keep going, keep going. Boom, boom, boom went the trees. How's it going? Boom, 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 boom. Boom, 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 boom. Through that forest, the most nimblest, fastest ride he'd ever been on. Up into the air and over a river. For a second, Thaddeus thought he was flying, and then boom, down they went again. Boom, 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 went the trees faster. On and on and on. It was the fastest and most exhilarating ride he had ever been on in his life, and it stopped. Thaddeus didn't. He went over the deer, onto the floor, and oh, what? This is weird. Thaddeus stood up and he looked at the ground. There was a long line going in both directions. The edge, one side was forest and wild. The other side was brown soil, flat, level, for as far as he could see. He couldn't fathom how it could be such a great space. And in that space there was a hill. It was a very strange looking hill. It had a great big round rock in it. And as he looked at that hill, the deer gave him a little bit of a nudge, and he began to run. And it ran, and as it ran, each movement, each step, it got faster and faster and faster. It lowered its antlers straight towards the rock, and the rock shattered into tiny pieces and became rubble upon the ground. The deer staggered, fell down, and lay. Thaddeus ran over to it, and there his eyes were all rolling in its head, and his tongue was hanging out. And he thought, oh yeah, not so bad then. What's in here? And he climbed over the rubble and he looked inside. It's weird. Before him was a big rectangular room. Every surface of that room was covered in tiles, and each tile had strange markings and figures within it. And just before him, on the ground, was a round circular stone, a bit like a millstone. It had some markings in the middle, and he thought, oh well, hiding to nothing. And he stepped on. And the moment he did, he had a grinding sound, and the stone began to sink down and down and down it went. And eventually it stopped. It stopped on the floor of a room exactly the same size as the one above. Only this one had an earthen floor, and down the wall were vials, vial upon vial, and in each one was a strange blue, gassy sort of liquid. And as he was looking at them, he heard what he thought was a sigh. Was that a phase? No. He went to walk, and on the ground was a glass box. And in the glass box, which looked a bit like a display case, was the perfect model of a farm. The buildings, the fields, the outhouses, everything perfect in miniature. Even the leaves on the trees and the grass on the ground was perfect. He was so impressed. He went to walk around it, but bumped into something else. There was another glass box. Well, actually, it was a glass coffin. And inside the coffin was a rather pretty young girl. She had burnished blonde hair, and that hair was wrapped around her body, all the way down to her perfectly manicured little toes. And he looked, and as he looked, he saw that there was a red ribbon hanging, and that ribbon moved once, twice, 3 times. You must be alive. You're alive. And the eyes opened. Oh, they were the most beautiful, startling green eyes he had ever seen. And a smile upon her face, and she said, I knew you were coming. I've dreamt about you, and I know that you are my saviour. You are my hero. That you're going to get me out of this mess. Can you unlock me, please? And he undid the bolts, lifted over the lid, and he handed her his hand. He said, would you like a hand? And she went, no, I'd rather you went and got my clothes, thank you very much, they're over there. Oh, okay. So he gave her her clothes, and he spent a lot of time being very careful and looking at all of the little miniature things, because, well, if he did that, he wasn't thinking quite so much about what might be happening behind him. And then she tapped him on the shoulder. I'm ready now. Can we sit down? I need to tell you my story. And Thaddeus said, oh, okay then. So they sat opposite each other. And she said, I have a brother. And my brother and I, we have had the best relationship all of our lives, even when we were tiny. And as we grew, we got closer. We love the same things, we love doing the same things. We get on so well that when our parents died and we took over our farm and our lands, we decided we wouldn't marry anybody else. We wanted to keep our life like it. People were always coming from far and away. They would tell us their stories. They would stay. We would have parties. Oh, yeah. And then one day, a magician arrived. And he came with his stories of his travels. He came with wondrous things. He came with all of his magical skills. And my brother, he's a sucker for tricks. And the two of them, they were like plotting thieves. They could not break apart from each other, so much did they enjoy it. But after a while, you know, I got a bit bored. So I decided I'd go to bed. I went to sleep. And I was woken by this weirdest, awful, strange music, not as beautiful as being played now. And I just thought to myself, what is that? And the doors of my room burst open. Now those doors had been locked. And there, standing there, was the magician. Well, hello, darling. I have control over you. You know he was right. I could not move my entire body. I could look at him. I could hate him. I could feel myself becoming more and more angry with him. And he stood there and he said, marry me. How could I answer such a thing? Foolish man. Marry me. Marry me now. Say it. And the more he said it, the more I was determined never, ever to speak to him again. If you do not say yes, you will regret it. I couldn't say anything. And the next thing I knew, it was morning. And the magician, well, I just didn't know. I rushed to go and tell my brother, but he wasn't in his bed. I ran down the stairs, and the servant said, the magician and your brother have gone hunting. They're in the woods. I grabbed my horse. I didn't even bother to put a saddle or a bridle. I just went. I went to every single one of our hunting grounds, and he was not there. And I was so worried. I was so scared. And then coming towards me was my brother's horse, but it wasn't my brother. It was the magician. And behind him, on a rope, was a stag. And I stopped and I said to him, "Where is my brother?" And he said, This is your brother." No, that's not possible. It's not possible. And the magician said, "Nod if you're her brother." And the deer nodded its head. I was so furious, I took out my gun and I shot at him. But the bullet went so far and then turned round and went right into my horse's head. And it fell. And then I woke up here. I woke up in that awful coffin, unable to move. And there he was standing over me, laughing. And he said, "Well, you're going to say yes now? Now that I've miniaturised your entire lands and all of your people are in these bottles? And your brother is out there on his own in the forest being hunted by everything. Will you say yes now?" And I knew I couldn't. I couldn't give in to that level of tyranny. I would not. And still I said nothing. "Right, then stay forever." And with that, I found myself in a trance. I could have dreams but never wake up. And I knew and remembered them all, and they were awful. And then I had a dream of you. And here we are. And I know in my dream what you have to do now. You need to get this stuff up and out of this place. And so, as quickly as they could and with care, they carried that model within the box and they placed it upon the stone, and when they took it outside onto that flat soil and lifted the lid with a whoosh, pop, it was all back the way it had been on the last day she'd been there, perfectly laid. Now for my people. And they went down and they collected the vials, as many as they could carry. And when they took them upstairs, out in the open, she laid them carefully on the ground and took the glass stopper out of one. And there was one person from her home. Oh, my man. Oh, my stable lad. Let's find the rest. And so they began to pop open those vials. And it wasn't long before the place was covered in people, chatting and talking to each other, hugging and kissing. "I've missed you. What happened? What is going on? I don't get it." And while all this was happening, that young woman, she was looking and looking. Oh, not my brother, Dad. Where is my brother? And at that moment, there was a movement among the trees, and out stepped a stag. And it began to run towards her, and she began to run towards it. And she got hold of him, and she hugged him, and she hugged him so tight. "Oh, brother! Oh, gosh, brother, there's been so much awful." And the tears sprung from her eyes, and as they did, he turned back into her brother. And they hugged and they kissed. And later that day, they parted. Oh, did they party? They parted and they parted as though they might party forever. But eventually, the party came to a quiet. And it was at that point, she said, "My hero, Thaddeus, will you stay and maybe in time become my husband?" And Thaddeus thought about his possible options of going back home and decided that he was definitely a lot better here. And so it was that Thaddeus spent time there building the most incredibly useful gadgets, like tractors and rollers. And the kids loved him because he was always coming up with some new toy to play with. And that, wow, that was definitely a happy ever.
Often.